Eleanor Ellie Cooper woke up in her quiet apartment, the light filtering in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. It was a familiar routine, one that had settled over her life like dust on an old bookshelf. At 65, Ellie was no stranger to change, but the recent divorce had left her feeling like an unfamiliar version of herself. 40 years of marriage, 4 decades of shared mornings, nights, and dreams, all now reduced to a stack of legal papers and an empty ring finger. She couldn't remember the last time she hadn't felt this, alone. As she swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cool floorboards pressed against her bare feet. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, studying the face that had aged with grace, but held the echoes of past happiness and pain. She had spent so many years in the company of someone else, and now it was just her. The apartment felt too big for just one person, too quiet for comfort. She couldn't decide if it was a relief or a burden. She brushed her teeth, slipped into the simple blouse and skirt she wore every day, and headed out the door to start her day. She didn't mind the walk to work. It gave her time to think. She worked at Prime Solutions Group, a small accounting firm that was more of a fixture in her life than a passion. The work was steady, the faces at the office familiar but distant. The routine had become predictable. Every day was just another to-do list to check off. Ellie felt oddly detached as she passed her coworkers in the hall, their nods polite but not warm. It was as though she were invisible to them, which, in some strange way, felt like a blessing. No one knew her story, and that was fine by her. She was no longer the woman who belonged to someone else. Here, in the office, she was just Ellie, a quiet, solitary figure in a sea of people going about their business. At lunch, Ellie took her usual walk outside. It was in these moments when she was alone with her thoughts that she felt a little more like herself. She didn't have to pretend, didn't have to fit into any roles. But today was different. As she passed the familiar park bench, a young woman sitting there caught her eye. Savannah Blake. She was huddled in a worn coat, her eyes downcast, her hands clutching a plastic cup. Ellie had seen her around before, but today, there was something about the young woman's vulnerability that caught Ellie off guard. Without really thinking, Ellie reached into her purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. She placed them in the cup. Savannah looked up, her eyes meeting Ellie's with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Ellie gave a small nod, offering a faint smile. "Take care of yourself," she replied before walking away. It wasn't much, just a few dollars, but it was something. Ellie hadn't intended to give the money, but something about the girl's eyes, a reflection of her own loneliness, made her do it. She didn't know it then, but this simple act would become a small but significant part of her daily routine. Each day, as she walked past Savannah, she would slip a little more into the cup, each moment making her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could still make a difference. In a life that had become nothing but routines and empty spaces, this one small connection felt like a spark of something new. Ellie couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope that maybe this was the beginning of something different, a new chapter she had yet to write. It was just another ordinary morning as Ellie walked down her familiar route to work, the brisk autumn air nipping at her cheeks. The streets were lined with the usual hustle, people hurrying to work, the occasional car honking in the distance, and the hum of city life all around her. But as Ellie passed the corner near the park bench where she had seen Savannah Blake yesterday, something felt different. She noticed Savannah right away, sitting in her usual spot, but this time the young woman was looking up, her eyes sharp and focused. She was no longer hunched over in her coat, but sitting upright, staring at Ellie with an intensity that sent an inexplicable shiver down Ellie's spine. As Ellie walked past, she barely had time to register the uneasy feeling before Savannah shot up from her seat and grabbed her wrist. Ellie froze, startled by the sudden contact, her heart pounding in her chest. Savannah's grip was firm, her face serious in a way Ellie had never seen before. "Don't go home tonight," Savannah whispered urgently, her voice low but filled with an eerie conviction. "It's not safe." Ellie blinked, her mind racing. For a moment, she couldn't process the words. What was this? A warning? A joke? It didn't make sense. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Savannah let go of her wrist and sat back down, her expression unreadable. Ellie stood there, confused, the echo of the warning ringing in her ears. She shook her head, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way this made any sense. Savannah was just a young, homeless woman. What could she possibly know about Ellie's life? But as she continued walking toward work, a creeping unease settled in the pit of her stomach. The more she thought about it, the less she could dismiss it. Savannah's warning wasn't a simple comment. There was something urgent, something off about the way she said it. The hairs on the back of Ellie's neck stood on end as she pushed the thought to the back of her mind. The rest of the morning went by in a blur of routine. Ellie tried to shake off the unsettling feeling as she sat at her desk at Prime Solutions Group, sifting through a pile of invoices. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the mundane tasks, her mind kept drifting back to Savannah's words. "Don't go home tonight." As Ellie glanced at her computer screen, her eyes caught something strange, a document she didn't remember seeing yesterday. It was a routine financial report, but it was flagged with a missing signature. Ellie frowned. She didn't recall handling it or even reviewing it. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, and she scrolled through the file, but everything seemed off. She'd been thorough yesterday. She would have noticed this. Her phone buzzed with an email, and she glanced at it absent-mindedly. But before she could click open the message, her thoughts were interrupted by Tyler Brooks, the security guard who was standing in the doorway of the office. He had a strange look on his face, not the usual friendly wave he gave her every morning. "Hey, Ellie," he said, his voice casual but with an edge of something she couldn't place. "I've been meaning to ask, what's your address again?" Ellie blinked in surprise. "My address," she repeated, caught off guard. "Why?" Tyler shrugged, his posture relaxed, but there was something too deliberate about his movements. "Oh, you know. Just making sure the security systems are updated. It's standard procedure, just a quick check." Ellie felt her chest tighten. Tyler had never asked her about her address before. Her mind raced with 100 questions. Why now? Why her? It was such an odd question, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that there was something more to it. She gave him a tight smile, trying to sound casual. "You have it already, Tyler. It's the same one as always." He gave a half-smile, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Right, of course, thanks." And with that, he turned and walked away. Ellie sat frozen at her desk for a moment, the lingering feeling of discomfort slowly building into a knot of anxiety. She couldn't shake the thought of Savannah Blake's warning, and now Tyler's strange behavior added to her growing sense of dread. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. What was going on? Was she just being paranoid, or was something bigger at play? As the hours dragged on, Ellie found herself glancing at the clock more often than usual, unable to shake the uneasy feeling settling in her chest. She tried to focus on her work, but the nagging thought kept gnawing at her. Don't go home tonight. Ellie wasn't sure what was happening, but she couldn't ignore the creeping sense that something was terribly wrong. The day seemed to stretch on forever as she fought the urge to leave work early, not knowing what awaited her when she finally returned to her apartment. The unknown hung over her, thick and suffocating, like a storm cloud waiting to break. But the question remained. Should she listen to the warning, or was it just her mind playing tricks? Ellie sat at her desk, staring at the stack of paperwork in front of her. The steady hum of the office was a familiar sound, one that usually brought her comfort. The steady clicking of keyboards, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional ringing of phones, everything was exactly as it always had been. But today, it felt different. Her mind kept drifting back to Savannah Blake's warning, "Don't go home tonight." The words replayed in her head like a broken record, and no matter how hard she tried to focus, the unsettling feeling lingered. She pushed the thought aside and picked up a set of financial reports that needed to be filed. She glanced through them, but it was as if her mind wasn't fully there. The numbers blurred together, and her fingers trembled slightly as she placed them into their respective folders. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, but Ellie barely noticed, her thoughts tangled in a web of anxiety. Her gaze kept drifting toward the door. She wondered if Savannah was out there, maybe waiting for her. The thought seemed irrational, but she couldn't shake the sense that the young woman's warning had meant something more. Ellie took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand, but it was impossible to ignore the unease that had settled deep in her chest. Just then, Victor Anderson, the director of the firm, approached her desk. Ellie had worked for him for years, but today, there was something off about the way he stood in front of her. He seemed more scrutinizing than usual. "Ellie," he began, his voice calm but carrying an edge that Ellie couldn't ignore. "I was reviewing some of the reports, and I noticed there are a few signatures missing on documents. I'm sure you've seen them before, right?" Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She paused, her fingers stilling on the keyboard. She didn't recall seeing any missing signatures. In fact, the documents she had worked on seemed fine when she left yesterday. Had she missed something? She had always been meticulous with her work, but now doubt crept in. I don't recall," she stammered, trying to mask the unease in her voice. "I'll check them again." Victor gave her a knowing look, as if he expected her to remember. "It's important, Ellie. We can't afford these kinds of oversights." His words hung in the air as he walked away, and Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking at her differently. Had something changed? Was he doubting her? She forced herself to focus, trying to push the nagging thought aside. But it lingered, gnawing at her. As she tried to get back to work, she found herself glancing at the clock again, watching the minutes crawl by. She was in a constant battle with her own mind, torn between dismissing the warning as a figment of her imagination and considering the possibility that something was wrong. She tried to calm herself, but the tension in her chest was building, and no amount of focus seemed to help. Then, just as she was beginning to settle back into her routine, Tyler Brooks, the security guard, walked into the office. Ellie didn't see him often during the day, and when she did, it was usually in passing. But today, he seemed to be lingering near her desk. "Hey, Ellie," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes were watching her closely. "I was wondering, how's your place? You've been there for a while, right?" Ellie frowned, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't like Tyler to ask about her personal life. She knew him well enough to know that he wasn't the nosy type. Still, there was something unsettling about the way he asked. It felt probing. "My apartment," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's fine, why do you ask?" He shrugged, his gaze lingering on her. "Just curious. Making sure everyone is okay. The weather's been bad lately, and you never know." Ellie nodded, a tight smile forming on her lips. "I'm fine, thanks." But the conversation lingered in her mind long after Tyler left. Why had he asked about her living situation? It was such an odd question, and his tone had been just slightly off, as if he were checking something. Or maybe, just maybe, Ellie was being paranoid. But how could she ignore the growing sense of discomfort that had followed her all day? She rubbed her temples, trying to focus once more. "Don't go home tonight." The words echoed louder in her mind, and Ellie felt a wave of cold rush over her. She was trying so hard to brush it all off, to tell herself that it was nothing. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. What if Savannah Blake was right? What if something was waiting for her at home? But then again, could she really trust the warning of a young, homeless woman? She had no reason to believe her, no reason except the feeling in her gut, the same gut feeling that told her something was off. Ellie felt like she was standing at the edge of something, but she wasn't sure what it was. Was she overreacting, or was there a deeper truth to be uncovered? The more she thought about it, the more she realized she had no choice but to find out. Ellie's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she approached her apartment building. The day had dragged on, her thoughts still clouded by the events at work. But a strange sense of urgency tugged at her. Savannah Blake's warning refused to leave her mind. "Don't go home tonight." She brushed the thought aside again. What was she thinking? It was irrational. But as she turned the corner, her heart skipped a beat. The acrid scent of smoke filled the air. A wave of panic rushed through her chest as she reached the entrance of her building. There, in the distance, she could see the glow, a flickering, violent orange light that painted the evening sky. It wasn't the warm glow of a streetlight or a sunset. It was fire. Her heart sank as her eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before her. Ellie broke into a sprint, her breath quickening, panic tightening her chest. As she reached the front door, a fire truck roared past, its sirens deafening. The front of the building was surrounded by flashing lights, emergency vehicles, and uniformed firefighters. The front doors were closed off with yellow caution tape, and several bystanders stood at a distance, murmuring in hushed tones. Her legs felt like jelly as she approached the nearest firefighter, her voice trembling as she spoke. "What happened? What's going on?" The firefighter didn't even look up from his work, but he gave her a quick, sympathetic glance. "There's been a fire. We're still assessing the damage." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. "My apartment, is it?" "Which floor are you on?" the firefighter asked, his tone shifting slightly as he turned to face her. "Third floor," Ellie answered, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded grimly. "The fire started on your floor. We've got it under control now, but it's bad. You'll need to speak with the police. They'll give you more details." Ellie felt her knees weaken, and she stumbled back against the brick wall of the building, staring up at the blackened windows of her apartment. Her mind raced. This couldn't be happening. She had just been there, just this morning. What if she hadn't listened to Savannah? What if she had ignored the warning? She could have been inside, right now, in the thick of the flames. Her mind was in a daze as she spotted an officer standing at the scene. She approached him, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her shoulders. "Excuse me, officer," Ellie said, trying to steady her voice. "I live in the building, my apartment, on the third floor, is it?" The officer's face softened, and he gave her a slight nod. "I'm afraid it's been completely destroyed. The fire was intense." But he paused, looking her over as if ensuring she understood the severity. "You're lucky. We're still piecing together the details, but if you'd been inside, it would have been much worse. You should count yourself fortunate." Ellie's stomach churned with a sickening realization. Fortunate. She felt anything but fortunate. The apartment she had called home for years, the space that had once held the echoes of laughter, the hum of quiet mornings, the comfort of her life, was gone, reduced to ashes. And yet she was alive, miraculously alive, all because she had listened to Savannah Blake's warning. "Do you have any idea what caused it?" Ellie asked, her voice trembling. The officer's brow furrowed. "We're still investigating, but it looks suspicious. The fire started right in your unit, and we've already found signs that it was intentionally set." Ellie's blood ran cold. Intentional. The word felt like a blow to the chest, knocking the air from her lungs. It wasn't an accident. This fire had been planned. Someone had set her apartment on fire. Someone had wanted her gone. But who and why? A wave of nausea hit her as she processed the officer's words. She wasn't just the victim of a random disaster. She was the target. But why? Her thoughts swirled with fear, confusion, and disbelief. The pieces started to fit together in a way she didn't want to believe. Savannah had warned her, and now her apartment was gone. It wasn't just a fire. It was an attack. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as she looked back at the firefighters still working at the scene. The thought of returning to her apartment, the one place where she'd thought she could still find some semblance of peace, was impossible. There was nothing left to go back to. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She had to find Savannah again. She needed to understand what she knew, how she had known, and what she could do next. Determined, Ellie made her way back toward the street, her thoughts racing. She couldn't ignore this any longer. She had to go back to Savannah Blake. She needed answers. As she walked, the weight of her situation settled deeper. Her life had just been torn apart, but Ellie wasn't ready to let fear consume her. She had been through worse in her life, and if there was one thing she knew, it was this. She would find the truth, no matter where it led. Ellie sat nervously in the corner booth of a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm cup of coffee. The steam rose from the mug, but it did little to settle the chill that had settled in her bones. Her apartment was gone, and now, sitting here with Savannah Blake, she could feel the weight of everything crashing down on her. Savannah walked in a few minutes later, her worn coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The young woman's eyes were tired, but there was an undeniable sharpness to her gaze, an intensity Ellie hadn't noticed before. She slid into the booth across from Ellie, her movements deliberate, as if she had something heavy to say. "Savannah," Ellie's voice trembled slightly. "I don't know where to begin. My apartment, it's—" "I know," Savannah interrupted softly, her gaze intense. I warned you, didn't I? You were supposed to listen. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, sliding it across the table. I knew something was coming. I saw it. They were watching your building. Ellie opened the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out several photographs. Her breath hitched as she looked at the first photo, a blurry shot of a man standing outside her building late one night, his face hidden beneath the shadows of a hoodie. The next few shots were clearer, showing two men in dark clothing lingering around the back entrance of the building, glancing over their shoulders as if they were waiting for something or someone. Her eyes froze on the second man in the pictures, the unmistakable figure of Tyler Brooks, the security guard from her office. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Tyler, the same man who had casually asked her about her address just days before, the same man who had given her that strange, probing look. He was involved in this. Somehow, he was connected to the fire. Ellie's hands shook as she placed the photos down on the table. Her mind raced as the truth slowly began to sink in. Tyler Brooks. How could she have been so blind? She trusted him. He'd been a part of her everyday life. The last person she ever would have suspected. But there he was, clearly captured in these photographs, involved in something dark, something criminal. How did you know? Ellie whispered, her voice barely above a breath. How did you see this happening? Savannah leaned back in her seat, her gaze hardening as she spoke. I live in that area. I've been around your building for days, watching. I know how the streets work. People like Tyler and the others, they don't just blend in, they have their patterns. I started noticing the guys hanging around. Then I saw them getting into the building late one night. I couldn't tell who they were, but something about it felt wrong. Ellie's mind was spinning. How could Savannah have seen this? Was she following these men? Had she been keeping track of them for days? I started following them, Savannah continued, her voice low. I couldn't just sit back and watch, and when I saw them going inside, I knew something was going to happen. But I didn't know what, not until I saw you that morning. I knew I had to warn you, but I didn't know how. She paused, her gaze softening as she met Ellie's eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how deep Savannah had been involved in all of this. She was a stranger, someone Ellie had passed by on the streets. But now, she was the one who had kept Ellie safe. Ellie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude mixed with the fear of what was to come. Ellie's mind raced, the images of Tyler's involvement flashing before her eyes. What else didn't she know? What else had he been hiding? She felt her anger grow, boiling in her chest like a slow fire. He had lied to her. He had been part of something that had nearly destroyed her life. I don't know what to do with this, Ellie muttered, staring at the photos. Should I go to the police? Will they believe me? Savannah's voice grew more urgent. You have to go to the police. They need this evidence, Ellie. They need to know that Tyler isn't just some random security guard. He's involved in something bigger. And if you don't act, they'll get away with it. Ellie's stomach twisted in knots. Savannah was right. She couldn't let this slide. Not when her life, her home, had been destroyed. Not when she was now living with the realization that people she had trusted were behind it all. She had to take action. She had to stop them before they did even worse. Taking a deep breath, Ellie met Savannah's gaze. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air between them. She had been dragged into this mess without knowing it. But now, she was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. The truth was out there, and it was in her hands. I'll contact the police, Ellie said, her voice firm. I'll go to them. This stops now. The resolve in her voice surprised even herself. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be danger. There would be retaliation. But she had come too far to back down now. The criminals had gone too far, and Ellie wasn't about to let them get away with it. Savannah nodded, her face softening for the first time since they'd sat down. You're doing the right thing, Ellie. Don't let them win. I'll help however I can. Ellie stood up, the decision clear in her mind. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she was done being a passive victim. It was time to fight back. As she walked out of the cafe, the weight of the photos still heavy in her pocket, Ellie knew that she was stepping into a dangerous game. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had control, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Ellie sat in the sterile, quiet room of the police precinct, the air thick with tension. The photos sat in front of her, neatly arranged on the table, their damning evidence too much to ignore. She had already spoken with Detective Marcus Hayes once, but now, sitting across from him in this dimly lit office, she felt the weight of the situation settling around her like a heavy fog. Detective Hayes was a man in his 40s, sharp-eyed with a demeanor that suggested he had seen it all. His calm presence made Ellie feel a little less frantic, though the gnawing anxiety in her gut still refused to let go. The fire, the betrayal, Tyler Brooks, everything was so overwhelming. But she had to be strong. She had to see this through. "Thank you for bringing this to us, Ellie," Detective Hayes said, flipping through the photos. "These are valuable. We'll start putting the pieces together." Ellie nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes. The reality was still too fresh, too raw. Savannah Blake had warned her, and now here she was, a pawn in something much bigger than she had imagined. As Detective Hayes spread the photos across the table, his fingers lingering on Tyler Brooks's image, Ellie felt her stomach twist again. The realization hit her hard. The man she had trusted, the man who had seen her almost every day at work, was a criminal, a key player in this web of deceit. "I'm starting to connect the dots here," Detective Hayes muttered as he scanned the photos. "This man, Tyler Brooks, he's more than just a security guard. He's tied to the fire, yes, but it goes deeper. I've been pulling records, and we're seeing some pretty disturbing patterns." He paused, looking at Ellie. "You said you didn't know anything about the fraud at Prime Solutions Group, right?" Ellie's throat tightened as she nodded. I still don't understand. What fraud? What's happening?" Detective Hayes leaned forward, his face serious. "Turns out, your firm was involved in a money laundering operation. Tyler Brooks, along with others, was using the company as a front to move illicit funds through fraudulent transactions. We've been tracking suspicious activity for a while, but your involvement, it's more than just coincidental." Ellie's breath hitched in her chest. Money laundering, at her workplace, the firm she had been loyal to for years. How could she have been so blind? The realization of it hit her hard, and she felt a wave of nausea flood over her. All those late nights at the office, those deals that never seemed quite right, those minor inconsistencies she'd overlooked, they all pointed back to the same thing. Prime Solutions Group had been involved in something criminal, and she had been an unwitting accomplice. Her thoughts were interrupted by Detective Hayes, who pushed a file toward her. "I'm sorry to say this, Ellie, but it looks like you were an unknowing participant in this scheme. The transactions were disguised as routine business, but they were anything but. You've been caught up in something much bigger than you realized." Ellie's head spun. The implications of it all were overwhelming. How had she not seen it? How had no one seen it? As she grappled with the weight of this new information, Detective Hayes continued. "We have everything we need to make arrests, but I need you to stay hidden for now. There's still a lot we don't know about who's involved. It's not just Tyler. There's a bigger network at play here, and we're still tracing the money trail. If you're in the open, they may come after you." Ellie's chest tightened with fear. Stay hidden. She was already living in the shadow of a fire that had nearly taken her life, and now she was being told to disappear again. "I understand," Ellie said, her voice barely audible. "What do I do now?" Detective Hayes gave her a reassuring look. "We'll make sure you're safe. For now, you need to stay out of sight. We're going to seize Victor Anderson's computer and any related documents. We have enough to link him to this whole operation." Ellie's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Victor Anderson, the director at Prime Solutions Group. He had been at the top of the firm. He was the one who had run things. The thought that he had been orchestrating the fraud from behind the scenes was enough to make Ellie's blood run cold. "How did he fit into all this?" Ellie asked, her voice trembling. Detective Hayes's face hardened. "He's been at the center of it all. We've traced several transactions back to him. He's been laundering money through Prime Solutions Group for years, and now we've got him cornered. But he's not the only one we're after. We have a whole network to dismantle, and we're close to bringing it down." Ellie's mind raced. Victor Anderson, her boss, the man she had trusted, was the mastermind behind everything. Her stomach churned with disgust, and she felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. The firm she had worked at for so long, the people she had trusted, it was all a lie. But at least now it was starting to make sense. The fire, Tyler Brooks, the fraud, it had all been connected from the start. "I'll stay hidden," Ellie said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to help. I need to see this through." Detective Hayes nodded, his eyes softening. "We'll protect you, Ellie. We're getting closer. Just hang in there." As Ellie left the precinct, the weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders. She was no longer just a victim, she was part of something much bigger. The fight was just beginning, and Ellie was ready to take action. She had to, for herself, for the truth. The days following her meeting with Detective Marcus Hayes felt like a blur, each one more suffocating than the last. Ellie hadn't stepped outside her apartment in nearly a week, staying hidden, just as the police had instructed. The world outside had moved on without her, yet she was trapped in the growing realization that she wasn't just a bystander to a crime. She had been a pawn, and now the weight of that truth pressed heavily on her chest. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. Ellie glanced at it, an alert from the local news app. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the notification. Tyler Brooks arrested in connection with arson and fraud scheme. The headline hit her like a physical blow. Tyler Brooks, the man she had worked alongside for months, the man who had stood in the background of her life with no hint of malice, he was a criminal. And now he was in custody. Ellie felt a cold wave wash over her. She was supposed to feel relief, justice was finally being served. But instead, she felt nothing but a deep, gnawing fear. The arrest of Tyler was just the beginning. There was still so much left to unravel, and she couldn't shake the thought that she was still in danger. What if they had been watching her all along? What if she had been the target? The idea that she might have been marked for death, or worse, because she could expose their scheme made her blood run cold. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Kayla Rivers, her old friend who had been her lifeline during this nightmare. "Kayla, hey, you holding up okay? I know things are intense, but I'm here. Don't go through this alone." Ellie hesitated before replying, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had been pushing people away, too afraid to involve anyone else in her mess. But Kayla wasn't just a friend. She was family. Ellie needed her now more than ever. "Ellie, I'm scared, Kayla. I feel like they've been after me all along. I don't know what to think anymore. I'm not sure who to trust." Within minutes, her phone rang, and Ellie didn't hesitate to pick up. "Ellie," Kayla's voice was soft but steady, the concern in her words undeniable. "You don't have to carry this alone. You've been through so much, but you're not alone in this fight. I'm here, always." Tears welled up in Ellie's eyes as she sank into the couch, the emotional toll of the past few days hitting her all at once. "I just don't know what's going to happen. I've lost everything. My apartment, my job, my trust in the people around me." She paused, voice shaking. "What if they come after me next?" Kayla's voice was calm, a steady anchor. "You're going to be okay. You've already done so much by helping the police. The truth is out there now, and those responsible are being taken down. We'll make sure they can't hurt you. I promise you we'll get through this." Ellie wiped at her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The reassurance helped, but deep down, Ellie couldn't ignore the mounting fear. They were still out there, the people behind this entire scheme. Tyler Brooks was just one part of the puzzle. There were others who would stop at nothing to protect themselves, including Victor Anderson, the director of Prime Solutions Group. As the conversation with Kayla continued, Ellie's mind drifted back to Victor Anderson. He was the true mastermind, the one who had orchestrated the entire fraud scheme from the shadows. Tyler Brooks had been the enforcer, but Victor had been pulling the strings. If Tyler had been arrested, Victor was next. But what if he wasn't ready to go down without a fight? She hung up the phone with a weary sigh, her emotions torn between fear and a strange, burgeoning sense of empowerment. The wheels of justice were turning, and the criminals involved were starting to fall one by one. But there was a long way to go. Victor Anderson was still free, and his involvement in the entire operation was far from over. Ellie's stomach tightened at the thought of what he might do next. She reached for her phone again, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number for Detective Hayes. When he answered, His voice calm but with an undercurrent of urgency, Ellie didn't hesitate. "Detective Hayes, is there any news on Victor Anderson? What's happening with him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Detective Hayes spoke. "Ellie, we've got eyes on him, but we haven't made an arrest yet. He's still being protected by a network of people, and we're trying to get enough evidence to charge him. But he's not going down easy." Ellie felt her pulse quicken. Victor Anderson was always one step ahead. She had felt it in every meeting, every interaction with him. Now, more than ever, she realized how close she had been to the edge of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Victor wasn't just a criminal, he was a threat, a shadow that loomed over everything. "Be careful, Ellie," Detective Hayes added, his voice growing more serious. "We don't know who he's working with. There's still a lot we're uncovering. I'll keep you updated, but for now, stay out of sight. We're doing everything we can to take him down." Ellie's hands tightened around the phone, her heart racing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fire, the fraud, and the betrayal, it was all tied to Victor Anderson, and until he was brought to justice, Ellie would never be free. As she set the phone down, Ellie's mind raced with questions. How much danger was she still in? What would happen next? She couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her, fear of retaliation, of being caught in the crossfire of a battle she hadn't even started. But she couldn't back down now. The truth was finally coming to light, and Ellie was determined to see it through. The weight of the past weeks had settled into Ellie's bones, leaving her exhausted and emotionally drained. She had witnessed the unraveling of a life she thought she knew, the trust she had placed in people, the betrayal, the destruction of everything she'd built. And now, she was finally standing at the precipice of the truth. The man who had been at the center of it all, the one who had manipulated and deceived everyone, including her, was about to face justice. Victor Anderson, the director of Prime Solutions Group, had evaded the law for weeks. But now he was in custody, sitting across from Ellie in a sterile interrogation room, his demeanor cold and composed. The man who had once seemed so untouchable, so in control, now appeared vulnerable, stripped of his power. Ellie stood at the entrance of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined this moment would come. There had been a time when Victor had been someone she admired, someone she had respected. But now, all of that seemed like a distant memory, a version of the world that no longer existed. With a deep breath, she walked into the room, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Victor looked up, his eyes betraying a flicker of recognition as they met hers. For a brief moment, he seemed almost surprised to see her there. But then, his expression hardened, and the cold, calculating man she had known returned. "Ellie," he said, his voice smooth but laced with an edge, "I didn't expect you to be the one they sent to confront me." Ellie didn't sit. She stood tall, her arms crossed in front of her, her gaze unwavering. "You don't get to play the victim, Victor. Not anymore." Victor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not asking for sympathy, Ellie. I know what I did. I've lived with it. I'm just trying to come to terms with it all." He paused, his eyes shifting slightly as if weighing his next words. "You don't understand what it's like to be in my position. The pressure, the constant need to stay ahead of the game. People like us, Ellie, we don't get to live normal lives. We do what we have to survive." Ellie's pulse quickened as his words sank in. Survive? He was talking about millions of dollars, manipulating people's lives, and setting her apartment on fire, all in the name of survival. The anger inside Ellie flared up, a burning heat that she couldn't ignore. "You ruined everything, Victor," she said, her voice steady but full of rage. "You stole from people who trusted you. You took my life, my career, and you turned it into something ugly. You nearly killed me." Her words felt like they were being ripped from her chest. She couldn't hold them back. "And now you're sitting here, apologizing and asking for understanding." Victor's expression softened for a brief moment. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ellie. I never meant for it to go this far. But sometimes the things we do, the choices we make, they snowball. And before you know it, you're trapped in something that's bigger than you ever imagined. I didn't want you to be a part of it. I never wanted you to be hurt." Ellie felt the weight of his words. His apology, however insincere it felt, struck a chord in her. The betrayal, the manipulation, it had been so much to process, but now, hearing him speak of it with such regret, she couldn't help but feel conflicted. Could she forgive him? Could she let go of the pain he had caused? But then reality hit. She wasn't here to find closure. She wasn't here for forgiveness. She was here because Victor Anderson needed to pay for his crimes, for the destruction he had caused in her life and in the lives of so many others. "No," Ellie said firmly, her voice gaining strength. "I can't forgive you, Victor. I can't forget what you did to me, to all of us. You've destroyed so much, but I'll make sure you face the consequences of your actions." Victor looked at her, his face a mix of regret and resignation. "I understand," he said quietly. "I know I'm going to pay for what I did, but if it means anything, I'm sorry, Ellie, I really am." Ellie stood there for a moment, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, regret, relief. She had wanted answers, but she had also wanted closure. And yet, as she looked at Victor, she realized that she would never get that perfect resolution. No apology would ever erase what he had done, and no explanation would ever make it okay. But it didn't matter. She didn't need his apology to move on. She didn't need him to make things right. She would do that herself. Turning on her heel, Ellie walked to the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. She had faced the man who had ruined her life, and now it was time to move forward. As she left the interrogation room, the door clicking shut behind her, Ellie felt something shift inside her. The weight of the past few weeks, the fear, the anger, the confusion, it had all led to this moment. And in that moment, Ellie felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in a long time. The investigation wasn't over. There were still more criminals to bring down, more pieces of the puzzle to put together. But for the first time in months, Ellie felt like she was in control. She had faced Victor Anderson. She had confronted the truth. And now she would make sure that justice would be served. The past few months had been a blur of uncertainty, loss, and emotional upheaval. But as Ellie sat at her kitchen table in her newly furnished apartment, a sense of calm washed over her. The days of hiding in fear, the constant dread of retaliation, and the weight of betrayal felt like a distant memory now. She was slowly rebuilding, piece by piece, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly moving forward. The apartment she now called home was a fresh start, a place of refuge, free from the ghosts of the past. The walls, once scorched by the fire, had been replaced with new paint, and the rooms were filled with furniture that was her own. No longer did the space feel hollow or empty. It felt like hers. The insurance money had made it possible to rebuild, but it was more than just the physical changes that brought her peace. It was the emotional freedom she had gained from facing the truth, from letting go of the past. As she sat in her living room, sipping a cup of tea, Ellie's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She smiled as she saw Kayla Rivers' name flash across the screen. "Hey, Kayla," Ellie greeted, her voice light. "How's it going?" "I was just thinking about you," Kayla said, her voice warm and familiar. "How's the new place? Settling in okay?" Ellie leaned back in her chair, glancing around at her new apartment. "It's perfect. It feels like a fresh start. I'm still getting used to it, but it's coming together." "Good," Kayla replied. "I'm glad. You deserve peace, Ellie." Ellie smiled softly, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. "Speaking of peace, I ran into Savannah the other day. She's doing much better, you know. She found her daughter and they've started rebuilding their relationship." There was a brief silence on the other end, then Kayla spoke, her voice full of warmth. "That's incredible. I'm so happy for her. It sounds like she's found her own version of peace." Ellie nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of gratitude. "She has. I'm so grateful for her. If it hadn't been for her, I don't know where I'd be. She gave me the warning that saved my life. I'll never forget that." Kayla's voice softened. "Kindness comes back, doesn't it? You never know how one small act can change the course of everything." Ulla sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the truth of Kulla's words. A simple act of kindness, the kind of thing she had done without thinking twice, had led to the saving of her life. When she had handed that crumpled dollar to Savannah Blake on the street, she had no idea that it would lead her down this path. She had simply seen a young woman in need, and without hesitation, she had offered what she could. And in return, Savannah had offered Ullo a chance at a future she never thought possible. The universe had a strange way of giving back, Ulla thought. Sometimes, you didn't need grand gestures to make a difference. Sometimes, all it took was a simple act of compassion. As the days passed, Ulla's relationship with Savannah deepened. They had met several times since the investigation, sharing coffee, laughter, and conversations about life, about the past, the future, and the fragile nature of trust. Ulla had become a source of support for Savannah, just as Savannah had been for her. They understood each other in a way that few others could. Both had been through unimaginable pain, but both had found a way to rise above it. In those quiet moments, Ulla couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed. The job at Prime Solutions Group was a distant memory, its betrayal no longer hanging over her. She had accepted a new position at a smaller, more ethical firm. The work was steady, the environment supportive. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. It was hers. The world felt a little less heavy now. She glanced around at her apartment, her eyes falling on the picture of Savannah and her daughter that she had framed and placed on her mantel. It was a photo taken the day Savannah and her daughter had been reunited, two women who had both endured so much, but who had found a way to heal, to move forward. Ulla's eyes lingered on the photo for a moment, and then she stood, walking over to the window. She looked out at the bustling city below, the same city that had once seemed so cold and indifferent. Now it felt different. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the skyline. The city was still the same, but Ulla was no longer the woman she had been. She had fought through the darkness, faced her fears, and emerged stronger. She felt a sense of hope welling up inside her, hope for the future, for the possibility of new beginnings. She had survived the worst, and she had found the strength to move on. For the first time in a long while, Ulla felt truly free. She wasn't defined by her past or the mistakes of others. She was the architect of her own future, and the future was wide open. The sun hung low in the sky as Ulla walked through the gates of Serenity Gardens, the soft hum of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze filling the quiet space. The garden had become a sanctuary for her, a place where she could reflect on everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. It was the perfect place to bring Savannah Blake today, to mark a new chapter in their shared journey, one built on kindness, understanding, and unexpected connections. Ulla carried a small, wrapped box in her hands, the weight of it grounding her as she approached the bench where Savannah usually sat. The young woman had come a long way since their first meeting, since that simple, chance encounter on the streets. Savannah had found her daughter, started to rebuild her life, and was now working at a local shelter, helping others who had been where she once was. As Ulla spotted her, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. Savannah sat on the bench, her eyes closed, her face turned toward the sun, looking peaceful and at ease. She looked up as Ulla approached, a soft expression crossing her face when she saw the gift. "I've got something for you," Ulla said, sitting down beside her. The warmth of the moment settled over both of them, the stillness of the garden enveloping them as if the world had paused for this moment of connection. Savannah raised an eyebrow but smiled. "What's this?" Ulla handed her the small box. "Just a little something to celebrate how far you've come. I know it's not much, but I thought you could use a reminder of everything you've overcome." Savannah hesitated for a moment and then slowly unwrapped the gift. Inside was a framed photograph of the two of them, the picture from the day they had shared coffee together, the first time they had truly connected as more than just strangers. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything. Tears welled in Savannah's eyes as she looked at the picture. "Ulla, I don't even know what to say. This means more to me than you know." Ulla's throat tightened as she watched Savannah hold the photograph in her hands, the weight of their shared history reflected in her expression. "You don't have to say anything," Ulla replied softly. "You've already given me more than I could ever ask for. You saved my life, Savannah. You were the one who saw me when no one else did, when I couldn't see myself. I'll never forget that." Savannah took a deep breath, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I couldn't have done it without you, Ulla. I didn't expect anything in return when I warned you. But I never realized how much I needed someone to believe in me. You gave me that. You showed me that kindness could come back when it felt like it was in vain." Ella nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Kindness always comes back, Savannah. Sometimes it's the smallest things we do that can change someone's entire world. I never imagined that a single act of kindness on my part would lead me to you. But here we are, both of us, stronger than we were before." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their shared experiences settling around them like a quiet, unspoken bond. Ella thought about everything she had been through, the betrayal, the fear, the uncertainty. And yet here she was, standing on the other side of it all. The journey had been long, and at times it had felt impossible. But it had also been transformative. It had taught her the power of kindness, the strength of connection, and the resilience that lived within her. "I think you're right," Savannah said finally, her voice full of conviction. "It always comes back, maybe not right away, but eventually it does. And when it does, it's worth every single moment." Ella smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. The world was still a big, uncertain place, but it no longer felt like an overwhelming force that was constantly pushing against her. She had learned to navigate it, to trust in the goodness of others, and most importantly, to trust in herself. As they sat there, side by side, Ella couldn't help but feel a sense of calm settle over her. The storm of the past was finally behind her, and she was ready to face whatever came next. "To new beginnings," Ellie said softly, raising her cup of tea in a quiet toast to Savannah. "To new beginnings," Savannah echoed, her smile wide and genuine. And in that moment, Ellie felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, one filled with hardship, yes, but also with the kind of human connection that made all the difference. She had survived the worst, and now she was moving forward, not alone, but with a renewed sense of hope. The future wasn't certain, but Ellie knew one thing for sure. Kindness always came back, and as long as she held on to that, she would never lose her way.